Hello everyone, I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I always find it fascinating to imagine people tuning in from all around the world, some perhaps in the middle of the day, others just as the night grows quiet. Wherever you are, I hope you are comfortable, maybe lying down, maybe sipping a warm drink, ready to drift away as we wander through the slow and steady rhythms of the past. Let's travel together back to America in the early 1700s, a place that was far different from the one we know today. Picture the land first. Vast stretches of forests so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground in some places, rivers winding endlessly, and fields slowly being cleared by settlers who built homes from timber they cut with their own hands. Towns were small, sometimes no more than a cluster of wooden houses around a meeting hall or a church, and the roads were rough, often nothing more than dirt paths that turned to deep mud when it rained. Horses and wagons carried people and goods, but more often than not, people walked, sometimes for hours, simply to reach a neighbor. The colonies at that time were still tied to England, yet life in America moved at its own pace. Most people lived on farms, and farming was not just an occupation, it was survival. Families rose with the sun, because daylight was precious. Without electricity or even reliable lamps, their world depended on the natural cycle of day and night. Imagine the morning beginning with the clatter of wooden pails, the sound of chickens scratching near the barn, and the smell of bread baking over an open hearth. For breakfast, a family might eat porridge made from cornmeal, sometimes flavored with a little honey if they were lucky, or perhaps slices of cold meat left from the night before. Coffee was rare and expensive, but cider, both sweet and fermented, was common even in the morning. Children had work to do from the moment they could walk. A boy of 6 might be sent to gather kindling, to carry water from a nearby stream, or to help scare crows away from the crops. A girl the same age might already be learning to sew, to churn butter, or to tend a small garden of herbs used for both food and medicine. Schooling existed, but only in some places, and often it was secondary to the endless demands of survival. Books were treasured objects, sometimes handed down from generation to generation. The Bible was the most common book in most homes, and many children learned to read by sounding out its passages in the flicker of candlelight. What fascinates me about this time is not just the hard work, but the rhythm of it. Life was slower and yet constant. You can imagine people moving through their day with deliberate steps, mending tools, tending livestock, spinning wool into thread. Entertainment was woven into the work itself. Stories were told while sewing or repairing nets, songs were sung while chopping wood or walking long distances, and gatherings at the tavern or the church were as much about conversation as they were about the purpose of the meeting. The sound of fiddles or flutes would fill the air on evenings when neighbors came together, and even in small, modest homes, dancing was a way to forget the weight of labor for a while. Travel was not common, but news traveled quickly when it mattered. Letters from Europe could take months to arrive, and yet rumors about local disputes, strange weather, or sightings of wild animals could spread from house to house in a matter of hours. Imagine sitting by the fire in the evening, hearing someone describe a bear seen in the woods nearby, or whispers about ships arriving in the harbor with goods from across the ocean, sugar, molasses, cloth, and sometimes things even more exotic, like porcelain or spices. Such items were luxuries, far beyond the reach of ordinary families, but they sparked imagination, making people dream of worlds far away. Food was plain, but filling. Corn, beans, and squash formed the foundation of many meals, learned from the indigenous peoples who had cultivated them for centuries. Meat was eaten when it was available, venison from hunting, pork from hogs raised nearby, or salted fish brought in barrels. Preserving food was a constant task. Without refrigeration, people smoked meat, dried apples, or stored root vegetables in cool cellars dug beneath their houses. In the dead of winter, meals could be repetitive, heavy with bread, broth, and whatever could be kept from spoiling, but in the autumn harvest there was abundance and celebrations to mark it. Religion shaped daily life strongly. Sunday was a day of rest, not simply suggested but expected. Churches were often the center of community life, not only for worship but for meetings, decisions, and social order. Sermons were long, sometimes lasting for hours, and children sat silently, learning patience in the pews. Yet beyond the strictness of faith, there was a deep sense of community. Neighbors helped one another build barns, harvest crops, or survive hard winters. Loneliness was real, but the bonds of necessity held people together. And beyond the towns, beyond the farms, there stretched the wilderness. To the colonists, it was both a source of fear and a promise of opportunity. Wolves howled in the forests at night, rivers swelled with spring floods, and storms tore down trees like twigs. But the land also offered richness: timber, fertile soil, wild game, and space that seemed endless. For those who dreamed of a life not bound by the crowded cities of Europe, America was a place where everything felt possible, even though it demanded everything in return. So when you imagine life in the 1700s in America, think not only of the hardship, but of the texture of daily existence. The creak of a wagon wheel, the smoke rising from chimneys at dusk, the quiet moments of families gathered by firelight. Think of the meals, the laughter, the exhaustion, and the small triumphs that carried people forward. In those details, the world comes alive, steady and unhurried, a rhythm that feels far away now, but is still waiting to be remembered. If we move deeper into the scene, into the daily fabric of the 1700s, you can picture the houses more closely. They were not grand, at least not for most families. Imagine a small wooden structure with rough-hewn walls, a chimney made of stone, and a roof covered with shingles split by hand. Inside, the main room served nearly every purpose: cooking, eating, working, and sleeping all unfolded in the same space. The hearth was the heart of the home, with its fire rarely allowed to die out, because starting a new flame was difficult and time-consuming. Furniture was simple: a few stools, perhaps a bench, a wooden table, and rope beds with mattresses stuffed with straw, feathers if the family was fortunate. The smell of such a home would have been a mixture of wood smoke, the scent of food slowly cooking in iron pots, and the earthy odor of wool, leather, and straw. It was not unpleasant, but it was heavy, tangible, and constant. Windows, if there were any, were small and often covered with oiled paper instead of glass, especially in the poorer settlements. Light was a luxury, and people conserved it, relying on the fire's glow or simple tallow candles that burned quickly and dripped with messy wax. In the long winters, this meant many hours in near darkness, with families gathered close together, speaking softly, or working with their hands even by dim light. Beyond the homes, the villages and towns took on their own rhythms. Markets might appear once a week, where people brought goods to trade: baskets of eggs, bolts of homespun cloth, jars of preserved fruits, or barrels of cider. Coins existed, but barter was often just as common, since money was scarce and uneven in value across the colonies. A farmer might trade a sack of grain for a set of iron nails, or a length of wool for help repairing a roof. At these gatherings, the news traveled as fast as the goods changed hands. A traveler might share stories of ships docking in Boston, or whispers of disputes with neighboring colonies, or reports of new laws from England that reached across the ocean to shape the colony's fate. Entertainment, though simple, was cherished. Music carried a strong presence, even without instruments. Singing was a part of daily life, from hymns in church to ballads sung while working in the fields. When instruments appeared, fiddles, flutes, drums, they transformed gatherings into small festivals. Imagine a cold night where neighbors packed into a one-room tavern, the air thick with smoke, laughter spilling out as the rhythm of a fiddle set feet tapping against the worn wooden floor. Such evenings were rare, but when they came, they lingered in memory. Clothing revealed much about the world of the 1700s. Most garments were handmade, stitched carefully by family members. Wool, linen, and leather formed the base of colonial dress. A man might wear a simple shirt, breeches, and a waistcoat, with stockings and sturdy shoes if he owned them. A woman's dress consisted of layers: an undershift, stays that shaped the body, a gown or petticoat, and often an apron. Colors were usually muted: browns, grays, and creams, though wealthier families might show brighter fabrics dyed with imported colors like indigo or madder red. Clothes were patched, mended, and reused until they could no longer be worn, at which point the fabric might be cut into rags or quilts. The seasons governed everything. In spring, Planting demanded every ounce of energy, as fields were plowed by hand or with the help of oxen. Children scattered seeds in neat rows, and families prayed for good weather. Summer brought the labor of keeping crops alive, fighting weeds, protecting livestock, and enduring the heat. Autumn was the time of harvest, when food was gathered and stored, a period of both relief and frenzy, since what was collected determined how well a family would endure the winter. Winter itself slowed life, but not completely. Snow cut off travel, storms pressed people indoors, and supplies dwindled, but there was also time for crafts, spinning wool into yarn, carving wood into tools, repairing shoes, or brewing ale. Medicine in this period was a mixture of knowledge and superstition. Herbs like sage, mint, and chamomile were used for teas to ease illness, while poultices made of mashed plants might be applied to wounds. Yet illness was feared deeply, because epidemics could spread quickly, and doctors were rare, especially outside the larger towns. People relied on home remedies, advice from neighbors, and prayers for recovery. A fever could mean danger, and childbirth carried serious risks, as many mothers and infants did not survive. Yet, despite this fragility, life continued, and communities adapted, passing down wisdom gained from both experience and necessity. Travel tells another part of the story. Imagine the effort it took to move from one colony to another. A journey of 50 miles could take days, requiring overnight stays at taverns or with relatives. Roads were rough, often filled with ruts, stones, and tree roots. Streams needed to be forded, sometimes on foot, sometimes with wagons. Those who traveled by sea faced their own challenges: unpredictable storms, cramped quarters, and the ever-present risk of shipwreck. And yet, despite these difficulties, people did travel, carrying letters, goods, and news that stitched the colonies together. What strikes me most when reflecting on this time is the balance between struggle and resilience. People worked endlessly, and yet within that effort, they carved out spaces for joy, for celebration, and for stories. Evenings around the hearth were filled with tales, legends of the old country, warnings about spirits in the woods, or accounts of historical battles retold with drama. These stories were not simply entertainment, they were threads that connected generations, teaching children about courage, faith, and perseverance. If you picture yourself walking through a small settlement in 1700, you might see smoke curling from chimneys in the early morning, children carrying water with wooden buckets, dogs barking as wagons rattle past, and the sound of an axe striking wood echoing from the trees. Life was demanding, yet it had a rhythm that bound everyone together. Every task mattered, and every season carried its own weight. In that balance, we begin to see not only how people survived, but how they shaped the culture that would slowly, over decades, evolve into something larger than they themselves could imagine. When we look more closely at the communities forming across America in the 1700s, we see a patchwork of cultures, traditions, and ambitions. The colonies were not all the same. Each region had its own pace of life, its own way of shaping the land and its people. In New England, towns were often tightly knit, built around a central meeting house, where religion and governance blended into one. The soil was rocky, the winters were long, and farming demanded relentless effort, but the sense of community was strong. Families worked not only for themselves but for the strength of the town, contributing to roads, schools, and defense when needed. Move southward, and the story changes. The middle colonies, with their fertile soil, produced wheat and grains in abundance. These areas became known as the breadbasket of the colonies, feeding both themselves and others through trade. Markets were livelier here, towns larger, and the mix of cultures more apparent. Dutch, German, English, and Swedish settlers lived side by side, bringing with them their foods, their building styles, and their customs. Walk through a marketplace in Pennsylvania and you might hear several languages spoken at once, smell the spices of foreign cooking, and see architecture that reflected traditions from across Europe. Farther south still, in colonies like Virginia and the Carolinas, large plantations dominated the landscape. Here, tobacco was king, and the rhythm of life was shaped by its demands. Plantations were sprawling enterprises, with wide fields, grand houses for wealthy owners, and the labor of countless enslaved people, whose forced work underpinned the prosperity of the few. The contrast between wealth and hardship was stark. While some families lived with elegance, dining with imported silverware, wearing fine clothes, and discussing politics by candlelight, others endured brutal conditions, their lives marked by toil, oppression, and the absence of freedom. In every colony, however, survival remained the foundation. The forests still pressed against the edges of settlements, filled with both resources and dangers. Indigenous nations remained powerful, their relationships with the colonists complex, shifting between alliances and conflict. Traders often worked as intermediaries, carrying goods like furs, tools, and weapons between groups, shaping a delicate balance that could change with the seasons. To many settlers, the indigenous people were both teachers and rivals, showing them how to live from the land, yet also resisting the encroachment on their territories. The cultural exchange was constant, though not always peaceful. Daily life carried small differences depending on where you lived, but also remarkable similarities. Food, for instance, reflected both necessity and creativity. In the northern colonies, you might find dishes like brown bread made from rye and cornmeal, paired with baked beans flavored with molasses. In the middle colonies, families enjoyed dairy products, sausages, and hearty stews influenced by German cooking. In the south, meals often included corn cakes, pork, and a variety of vegetables grown in the warm climate. Everywhere, cider flowed freely, while rum, imported from the Caribbean, became increasingly common in taverns. These taverns themselves were more than places to drink. They were gathering spots where news, arguments, laughter, and plans for the future all mingled. One fascinating detail lies in the way people measured time. Without clocks in every home, many relied on the church bell, the sun's position, or even the crowing of roosters. Time was felt in rhythms of labor rather than in minutes and seconds. Planting season dictated waking hours, harvest dictated days of celebration, and the approach of winter dictated urgency. Evenings stretched longer, not because the hours changed, but because candlelight created a different pace, slower, quieter, more intimate. Workshops added another layer to community life. Blacksmiths hammered out tools and horseshoes, their forges glowing in the early morning light. Carpenters shaped planks into tables, chairs, and wagons. Weavers turned wool and flax into cloth, and cobblers repaired shoes worn thin by long walks on uneven roads. Each trade carried importance, each craft a necessity. A community without a blacksmith, for instance, felt incomplete, vulnerable even, because iron tools and repairs were central to survival. Apprenticeships bound young people to masters, teaching them not only skills but also discipline and responsibility. Education grew slowly but steadily. In some towns, small schools emerged, often one-room buildings where children of all ages sat together. The lessons were simple: reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious instruction. Teachers were not always well-trained, but they were respected, their role considered essential for shaping the next generation. Books remained scarce, but when they appeared, they were treasured. Beyond the Bible, almanacs were especially popular, filled with calendars, weather predictions, and bits of advice for farming or daily life. These almanacs connected people not only to their own time but to a sense of the wider world. Festivals and gatherings created bright moments in otherwise hard-working lives. Harvest festivals filled towns with music, games, and feasting, while winter holidays brought candlelit services, shared meals, and stories told around fires. Weddings were community affairs, often lasting for days, filled with dancing, drinking, and singing. Even funerals, though solemn, drew people together, marking the cycles of life and death in ways that strengthened communal bonds. It is easy, from our perspective, to imagine the 1700s as a time of silence and separation, yet in truth it was filled with voices. The call of merchants selling wares in marketplaces, the cries of children playing near wells, the ringing of church bells, and the steady rhythm of work songs. These sounds wove together into a living backdrop, one that carried meaning for everyone who heard them. The world was not quiet, but layered, filled with both labor and life. And all the while, beneath the ordinary, history was stirring. New ideas were beginning to spread, about liberty, about governance, about what it meant to belong to a colony under a distant king. In taverns and homes, Whispers began to take shape, conversations that would, in time, build into something larger. But for now, in the early 1700s, the people lived mostly in the steady rhythm of necessity, carving out lives on a continent that still seemed vast and untamed. Imagine waking in the dim light of dawn, long before the sun fully rises, the chill of morning air seeping through the cracks of wooden walls. A family in 1700s America rarely lingered in bed. The day's work pressed heavily, and every task left unfinished today meant hardship tomorrow. First came the fire, embers carefully stirred back to life, kindling fed with patience until the flame caught. Without it, there could be no breakfast, no warmth, no comfort. Once the hearth roared back, the rhythm of the day began. Farming families moved quickly into their routines. Men walked to fields with hoes, plows, or sickles slung across their shoulders, sometimes leading oxen who groaned under the weight of wooden yokes. Women tended gardens, milked cows, churned butter, and kept watch over younger children while balancing endless tasks of cooking and cleaning. The smell of fresh bread was common in the morning, but it did not come easily. Flour had to be ground by hand or at a mill if one was nearby, dough kneaded by weary hands, and ovens kept at the right temperature by skill and instinct rather than dials. Children played less than we might imagine. Their games were short interruptions, squeezed between chores. A boy might carve a wooden top or toss stones into a circle scraped into the dirt. A girl might fashion dolls from scraps of cloth or practice rhymes while spinning thread. But soon enough, a parent's voice would call, and the play ended, replaced with labor. Even leisure carried purpose. A song sung while working, a story told while gathering herbs, laughter spilling during a task so that it felt lighter. Rest, when it came, was not lavish. At midday, meals were simple but filling: bread, cheese, perhaps dried meat or fish, washed down with cider or milk. These breaks were brief, stolen moments before returning to the fields or the loom. Evening, at last, brought more substantial food. Stews simmered for hours, thick with vegetables, salted meat, and sometimes beans or peas. Families gathered at rough tables, their conversations shaped by the day's events, the health of animals, the progress of crops, the weather's shifting moods. In towns, the pattern was similar, though colored by trades and professions. A blacksmith's day began with the roar of the forge, bellows pumping air into fire until iron glowed white-hot. The constant clang of hammer on metal echoed down dirt streets. A printer might spend hours setting tiny letters into frames, pressing sheets of paper that spread news across the colony. A tavern keeper rose early to brew ale, prepare food, and clean rooms for travelers. Everyone worked long hours, but each task fed into the fragile web that kept communities alive. Sundays marked a break from labor, though rest was hardly idle. Families dressed in their best clothing, often the only set reserved for special days, and walked, sometimes miles, to church. Services were long, sermons stretching across hours. Children fidgeted, yet discipline was strict. Religion framed life not only as worship but as order, shaping rules for behavior, morality, and community bonds. Afterward, neighbors lingered outside, exchanging news, discussing crops, or planning future work together. These gatherings provided a rare chance to connect, to step briefly beyond the grind of individual survival. The seasons painted these routines in shifting colors. In summer, heat pressed down, insects swarmed, and storms threatened crops, but days were long and work stretched into the evenings. In autumn, air grew crisp, and families raced against time to harvest before frost. Winter brought the most difficult months. Snow piled against doors, winds howled through forests, and supplies dwindled. Yet winter also slowed the rush, allowing families to spin wool, mend clothes, or carve tools by firelight. Spring, with its muddy roads and sudden rains, carried renewal but also strain, as fields demanded to be sown while stores from the previous year grew thin. Evenings, though, belonged to a softer rhythm. After meals, when candles burned low, stories filled the silence. Parents told children of ancestors, of voyages across the sea, of dangers lurking in forests, and of miracles that faith might bring. Superstitions ran deep. Ghosts, omens, and unexplained lights in the woods sparked both fear and fascination. These tales blurred the line between entertainment and warning, teaching children caution while giving families moments of shared wonder. Taverns provided another kind of evening. For travelers, they were lifelines, places of warmth, food, and company. For locals, they were hubs of news and debate. Smoke hung in the air as men argued over trade, taxes, or rumors of political unrest. Some drank heavily, others quietly listened, and sometimes fiddles played until voices rose in song. Though church shaped the moral fabric, taverns shaped the social fabric, providing a balance of freedom within a world of rules. The land itself shaped every choice. Rivers carried goods on rafts and small boats, connecting inland settlements with coastal ports. Forests offered timber for building, but also danger from wild animals and storms. Roads were often impassable in bad weather, turning travel into risk. Yet these hardships bound people to one another, because survival required cooperation. Neighbors lent tools, helped mend fences, and shared food when times grew lean. Without such bonds, isolation could quickly become deadly. And through all of this, the work, the faith, the struggle, there was an undercurrent of ambition. Colonists dreamed not only of surviving but of prospering, of turning wilderness into towns, of building futures for children. Each field cleared, each house built, each ship docked in harbor felt like a step toward something greater, even if they could not yet see the shape it would take. For them, America was not a finished nation but a fragile experiment, a place where each day's labor carved a path into an uncertain tomorrow. Walk through a colonial town in the early 1700s, and you would find yourself surrounded by buildings that reflected both simplicity and determination. Houses, small and sturdy, lined uneven streets that turned muddy with rain and dusty in summer. The meeting house, often doubling as both church and place of governance, stood at the center, its wooden frame taller than the rest, serving as a reminder of both faith and order. Nearby might be a schoolhouse, a tavern, a blacksmith shop, and perhaps a few merchants selling imported goods, sugar, cloth, nails, tools, everything that could not be made easily at home. The construction of homes tells us much about the lives within them. Logs stacked and notched at the corners formed the first shelters, rough and drafty. Over time, planks and clapboards replaced raw logs, and chimneys of stone rose higher. Floors were often bare, though wealthier families might scatter reed mats or woven rugs. In the dim interiors, the hearth dominated, not only for cooking but for heat. Pots hung on iron hooks, kettles bubbled with stew, and bread baked against heated stones. Every item had purpose, nothing was decorative without function. Even a carved chair leg or embroidered sampler was less about luxury and more about skill, pride, and evidence of careful hands. Furniture was sparse, yet families adapted. A single table could serve for meals, for writing letters, for teaching children to read. Beds were shared, often with multiple siblings sleeping together for warmth, mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers if fortune allowed. Storage was simple. Chests held clothes, linens, and sometimes precious keepsakes carried from Europe. Candlesticks and lanterns dotted the rooms, though light remained weak, creating shadows that danced across the walls at night. Step outside, and the smells of daily life surrounded you. Smoke from chimneys, animals in pens, bread baking, and earth freshly turned in gardens. Chickens scratched near doors, pigs rooted in small enclosures, and cows grazed on common land if space permitted. Dogs barked, cats hunted mice in barns, and horses, though valuable, were not as common as we might imagine. Many families walked wherever they needed to go, reserving horses for those who could afford them or for the labor of plowing and hauling. Towns pulsed with small gatherings. The blacksmith's hammer rang throughout the day, the sound of metal striking metal a steady heartbeat of the settlement. Children carried buckets of water from wells, their laughter mixed with complaints at the wait. Women met at communal ovens, sharing news while waiting for bread to bake. Men gathered at taverns, trading gossip and debating everything from crop prices to rumors of unrest in Europe. The world was small, but the conversations were lively, carrying both the weight of survival and the spark of curiosity. For those living outside towns, isolation carried its own challenges. A farmstead miles from neighbors could feel vast and lonely, especially during storms or long winters. Letters connected families, but mail was slow, sometimes delayed by weeks or even months. Still, families found ways to bridge the silence. They carved out traditions, singing together at night, telling stories, or marking special days with simple feasts. Birthdays, weddings, and harvest celebrations carried deep importance, reminding families that life was more than labor, that joy could bloom even in hardship. The design of settlements reflected both caution and ambition. Roads led to harbors where ships arrived with goods and news from across the Atlantic. Markets sprang up near crossroads, drawing farmers and traders into exchanges that built connections beyond immediate neighbors. Taverns doubled as inns, offering weary travelers not only food and drink but a chance to share stories of distant places. Courthouses, when they appeared, became symbols of order, places where disputes over land, debts, or contracts found resolution, shaping communities through rules and laws. Architecture in wealthier regions began to borrow from European styles. Brick houses with tall windows, wide porches, and symmetrical designs emerged, standing in stark contrast to the modest cabins of most settlers. These homes displayed wealth and influence, but they also marked a cultural aspiration to recreate, in some small measure, the refinement of cities like London or Amsterdam. Inside, owners displayed imported china, silver utensils, and libraries of books, objects that reminded them of connection to the wider world. Yet even within these grander walls, life remained bound to the same challenges: food to preserve, illnesses to endure, storms to survive. At night, towns shifted into quiet. Streets emptied, doors closed, and fires glowed faintly through shutters. The sound of crickets or frogs filled the darkness, interrupted by the bark of a dog or the call of an owl. Candles burned low, and families settled into sleep, often crowded into shared beds. Dreams mingled with the rhythm of nature, the howl of wolves far away, the creak of timbers in the wind, the occasional rumble of thunder rolling across the sky. But even in these quiet moments, ambition lingered. Every settlement, no matter how small, carried the weight of hope. To build stronger homes, to expand fields, to secure trade, to shape futures not only for themselves but for generations to come. Each nail hammered, each field cleared, each child taught to read felt like a step toward something enduring. The sense that tomorrow might be better was never far, even in the face of hardship. This mixture of simplicity, struggle, and vision gave life in 1700s America its unique texture. It was not a land of ease, but it was a land of possibility, where each home, each town, each voice contributed to a growing story, one that stretched beyond the daily grind into the shaping of a world that was still unfolding. If we step further into the daily routines of 1700s America, the connection between people and their food becomes clearer. Farming was not just a task but the foundation upon which every family balanced survival. The soil decided fortunes. In New England, rocky earth and shorter growing seasons forced people to work harder for smaller harvests, while in the southern colonies, long summers and fertile fields gave rise to larger crops, though these too carried risks of drought, flood, or pests. Corn was the constant. Nearly every household relied on it, whether boiled into porridge, baked into bread, or ground into meal for pancakes and dumplings. Beans and squash grew alongside, their trio forming what many called the Three Sisters, a gift of knowledge learned from indigenous communities who had long cultivated them together. Wheat appeared more commonly in the middle colonies, giving rise to loaves of bread that filled ovens with a comforting aroma. Rice took hold in the Carolinas, grown in flooded fields that shimmered in the sun, demanding endless labor yet providing a steady supply of food and trade. Livestock added another layer of security. Chickens provided both eggs and meat, while hogs were prized for their ability to forage and grow fat quickly. Pork, salted or smoked, became a staple, its presence in barrels and cellars marking a family's preparedness for winter. Cows offered milk, cream, and butter, though keeping them fed through the cold months was no small feat. Sheep gave wool as well as meat, linking the work of farming directly with the needs of clothing. Goats, less common, were kept for milk, hardy and adaptable animals for smaller households. Fishing carried importance along coasts and rivers. Cod, herring, and mackerel were caught, salted, and stored, providing reliable protein. Oysters and clams appeared in diets where waters allowed, their shells sometimes scattered near settlements in heaps that marked years of harvest. Inland, rivers gave trout or catfish, and families near lakes often set nets or traps to supplement meals. Hunting added variety: deer, rabbits, turkeys, and occasionally bears, but required skill, time, and weapons that not every family could afford. The cycle of food preservation defined survival. Without refrigeration, families mastered the arts of salting, smoking, drying, and pickling. Apples were sliced and dried on racks, beans strung into long chains to hang near hearths, and root vegetables stored in cool cellars dug deep into the earth. Cabbage turned into sauerkraut, lasting months when kept properly, and berries, when plentiful, became preserves or wine. The harvest season was both a time of relief and urgency, when kitchens and yards filled with the smell of cooking, boiling, and curing, all aimed at building a cushion against the long, hard winter. Meals themselves carried meaning. Breakfast might be as simple as corn mush or bread with milk, eaten quickly before work began. Midday meals gave more substance, perhaps a slice of meat, cheese, or a bowl of stew, while supper in the evening was the heartiest, eaten by firelight with family gathered close. Table manners were practical rather than refined. Forks existed but were rare, knives and spoons more common. Shared bowls and platters filled tables, and children learned early to eat without waste, for nothing could be spared. For wealthier households, meals showed status. Imported spices like nutmeg or cinnamon added flavor, sugar-sweetened drinks, and tea, though costly, appeared at gatherings as a symbol of refinement. Wine, rum, and brandy were enjoyed when available, while cider remained the drink of the many. Taverns reflected this mix, serving meals to travelers, roasts, pies, or hearty soups, alongside drink that fueled conversation and song. Food connected people to seasons in ways we often forget today. The first strawberries of spring brought joy, the ripening of corn signaled security, and the slaughter of hogs in autumn marked both abundance and the sobering reminder of winter's approach. Families worked together through these cycles, each member taking part, from children gathering herbs to grandparents preserving seeds for the next planting. Beyond necessity, food also became a thread of celebration. Weddings, harvest festivals, and community gatherings turned meals into feasts. Tables filled with roasted meats, pies of apples or pumpkins, fresh bread, and ale or cider flowing freely. These occasions lifted spirits, marking pauses in the relentless labor. Laughter rose, fiddles played, and for a time, even those who carried the heaviest burdens felt lightened. It is worth remembering that food was not just about taste but about survival, culture, and connection. Recipes carried memories of old countries, brought across oceans and adapted to new lands. German settlers baked pretzels, Dutch settlers made pancakes, English settlers brewed ale, and each dish blended with local ingredients to form something uniquely American. Even in the humblest cabins, where meals were plain, the act of sharing food built bonds that stretched across families and communities alike. And yet, as plentiful as the land might seem, hunger was never far away. Poor harvests, harsh winters, or illness among livestock could reduce families to desperation. Stories circulated of lean times when meals dwindled to bread and broth, when children went to bed hungry, and when neighbors had to rely on one another to endure. Such memories left lasting caution, making every good harvest not simply relief but gratitude, a reminder that fortune could shift with the seasons. So, when we think of life in the 1700s, food cannot be separated from the story. It was the measure of success, the source of comfort, the cause of celebration, and sometimes the shadow of fear. Every field, every seed, every harvest carried weight, shaping lives with a rhythm that never ceased. When the fields were tended, the animals fed, and the daily work set aside, people of 1700s America searched for ways to fill the quieter hours. Leisure did not arrive often, yet when it did, it carried a sweetness that lingered. Life was harsh, work constant, but moments of rest stitched together the human side of existence, showing that even in times of challenge, laughter, song, and companionship found their place. Music was perhaps the most accessible joy. A fiddle, a flute, or a drum could transform an ordinary evening into something lively. Families often kept simple instruments, and while not everyone played, nearly everyone could hum or sing. Folk tunes carried across generations, and dances accompanied by reels or jigs filled barns, taverns, or even open fields. In New England, Puritan influence frowned upon too much frivolity, yet music could not be silenced entirely. In the southern colonies, gatherings sometimes stretched late into the night with dancing, clapping, and songs passed from one community to another. Storytelling was another treasure. By the fire's glow, elders shared tales of old homelands, of brave ancestors, of mischief and lessons. Children listened wide-eyed, their imaginations carried into worlds both familiar and distant. Some stories taught morals, others offered warnings about greed, laziness, or pride. Folk tales from Europe blended with new ones from the American landscape, while indigenous traditions influenced settlers, weaving together a tapestry of narratives that shaped communities. Games filled lighter moments, both for children and adults. Simple amusements such as rolling hoops, tossing stones, or playing with handmade dolls brought joy to the young. Adults played cards when they could, with decks often worn and passed from hand to hand. Dice, checkers, and chess appeared in taverns, where men gathered not only for competition but also for conversation. Some games carried a small wager, though gambling too heavily was often frowned upon, as it could lead to conflict or debt. Reading, though limited by access to books, offered another form of escape. The Bible remained the most common book, found in many households, but almanacs, pamphlets, and collections of sermons or essays circulated as well. For those able to read, evenings might pass quietly with a candle flickering beside a page. In towns, bookshops and libraries began to emerge, though they were rare and often small. Literacy grew slowly, yet the hunger for words expanded with every generation. Religion, though serious in practice, also shaped leisure in the sense of gathering. Sunday services were not only moments of worship, but also chances for neighbors to see one another, to exchange news, and to share company. After long weeks of work in scattered farms or settlements, these gatherings reinforced bonds, reminding people they were part of something larger than their own household. Weddings and baptisms, too, became opportunities for feasting and merriment, filled with food, music, and shared joy. Seasonal festivals marked calendars with anticipation. Harvest time often brought community celebrations, when barns filled with hay also filled with laughter, dance, and tables of food. Winter, though long and severe in many regions, held moments of cheer with Christmas gatherings, when evergreen branches decorated homes, and families exchanged small tokens or shared meals that broke the monotony of cold days. In some places, May Day or other old European customs lingered, adapted to the new land's rhythms. Taverns carried an important role in colonial life, particularly for men. More than places to drink, they served as hubs of information, where travelers brought news from distant colonies or across the ocean. Conversation flowed as freely as ale, and debates on politics, trade, or local disputes echoed late into the night. The glow of candles, the clatter of mugs, and the murmur of voices created a constant hum that contrasted with the silence of fields and forests outside. Yet leisure did not belong only to adults. Children invented their own amusements when chores allowed. Running races, climbing trees, chasing one another through fields, these simple acts of play filled the hours between work and rest. Toys, when they existed, were often handmade: a carved wooden horse, a cloth doll, or a ball stitched from scraps of leather. These small treasures brought immense joy, treasured not for their cost but for the imagination they inspired. One cannot forget the role of nature itself in leisure. The land offered beauty that people turned to when work paused. Walking through fields, sitting by rivers, watching the sky at dusk, these quiet acts of observation gave a sense of peace. In a world without endless distractions, the natural landscape was both companion and stage, offering moments of stillness or awe that deepened people's connection to their environment. Travel, though not easy, was also a form of diversion. Visiting neighbors required effort, often a walk of miles or a bumpy ride on horseback or wagon, yet such visits mattered deeply. Hospitality was a virtue, and welcoming guests meant offering food, drink, and conversation, no matter how humble the home. Friendships grew in these exchanges, strengthening ties that proved vital when hardships came. It is striking to think how much of leisure in the 1700s revolved not around possessions or entertainment purchased, but around people, traditions, and the landscape itself. Joy was found in the flicker of a fire, the sound of music echoing through a barn, the warmth of shared meals, the rhythm of dance, or the comfort of familiar stories told again and again. Leisure was fleeting but precious, each moment a reminder that life, though harsh, also carried sweetness worth savoring. Beyond the farms and quiet villages of 1700s America, towns and cities grew steadily, each carrying its own rhythm and texture. Walking through one of these settlements, a visitor would notice immediately how different life felt compared to the countryside. Fields gave way to cobbled streets or dirt paths, lined with rows of wooden buildings, their shutters painted in modest colors, their chimneys exhaling thin smoke into the sky. The air carried a mixture of scents, fresh bread from a baker's oven, tar from shipyards, salt from nearby harbors, and the less pleasant smells of waste and livestock that mingled with human activity. Boston, Philadelphia, New York, and Charleston stood out as hubs of commerce and culture, though each retained the raw edges of a society still finding its place. Boston's harbor bustled with ships unloading barrels of molasses, crates of goods from Europe, and stacks of lumber from northern forests. Philadelphia spread wide with broad streets carefully planned, its markets filled with noise as merchants cried out prices for butter, candles, cloth, and tools. New York, under Dutch and then English influence, reflected a mix of traditions, its streets echoing with multiple languages. Charleston thrived on trade in rice, indigo, and enslaved labor, its docks alive with both wealth and sorrow. Markets were the true heart of a town. Farmers brought produce, butchers displayed cuts of meat, fishermen laid out their catch, and peddlers offered trinkets and tools. The constant hum of haggling created a rhythm of its own. Coins changed hands, though bartering remained common, as people exchanged goods directly. A basket of apples for a length of cloth, or candles for a jug of cider. Taverns nearby filled with chatter from those who paused to rest, share news, or simply watch the tide of humanity flowing past. Craftsmen gave towns their character. Blacksmiths hammered iron into tools, horseshoes, and hinges, their forges glowing red in dim workshops. Carpenters built furniture, ships, and houses, their saws and hammers forming a steady beat that echoed across neighborhoods. Cobblers mended shoes, coopers shaped barrels, and silversmiths worked carefully with delicate hands to fashion utensils and jewelry. Apprentices moved among them, sweeping floors, carrying water, and learning trades that promised future independence. Homes in towns varied widely. Wealthy merchants lived in larger houses with brick facades, multiple chimneys, and gardens carefully tended. Inside, their walls might be adorned with imported wallpaper or framed prints, and their tables set with pewter or even porcelain. Poorer families, in contrast, lived in smaller wooden houses, sometimes sharing space with multiple families under one roof. Streets reflected these divisions, yet life wove them together as everyone still met in markets, churches, and taverns. Noise defined a colonial city. The rattle of wagons, the clop of horses, the cries of vendors, the hammering of builders, all blended into a constant hum. At dawn, bells might ring to mark time, while at night, the glow of lanterns lit doorways, casting uneven light on narrow lanes. Stray dogs barked, children ran in small gangs, sailors sang songs from ships docked nearby, and amid it all, the steady presence of watchmen patrolled, lanterns in hand, tasked with keeping order. Religion remained visible, with churches rising prominently in town centers. Steeples pointed upward, bells calling people to gather. Sunday transformed the rhythm of a city. Shops closed, streets grew quieter, and congregations filled pews. After service, However, squares filled with greetings, news, and conversation. Religious life varied. Quakers in Pennsylvania, Anglicans in Virginia, Puritans in Massachusetts, and each shaped the tone of community gatherings differently. Education found its place in towns as well. Schoolhouses offered children lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, often strict in discipline, with slates and chalk as tools. Latin and classical subjects appeared for those destined for higher study, while apprenticeships in trades provided practical education for many others. Booksellers in larger towns offered printed works, and newspapers, though limited in circulation, began to inform readers about events across the colonies and beyond. The spread of ideas traveled slowly but steadily, shaping thoughts in ways that would later ripple through history. But alongside the order of trade and religion, shadows existed. Crime, though not rampant, troubled towns. Thieves stole from markets, drunkards caused disorder in taverns, and disputes sometimes escalated into violent fights. Stocks and whipping posts stood as reminders of consequences, placed in public squares for all to see. Prisons, crude and often overcrowded, held those who broke laws, though punishments were often swift and harsh. Still, a colonial town was not defined by fear but by energy. The blend of voices, the rhythm of work, the gathering of goods from across the Atlantic world gave a sense of movement and possibility. People spoke of opportunities, of land to the west, of ships arriving with exotic wares, of fortunes waiting to be made. Rumors spread quickly, carried from tavern to tavern, market to market, shaping expectations, fears, and hopes alike. Night in the town carried its own feeling. Lanterns flickered, casting shadows across uneven streets. The sounds quieted, though dogs still barked and the distant clanging of a blacksmith might continue into the late hours. Ships creaked in harbors, their ropes groaning with the tide. In wealthier homes, families dined by candlelight, while in humbler rooms, supper might be little more than bread and broth eaten quickly before sleep. The silence between houses reminded everyone how thin the walls were between security and vulnerability. The colonial city was both promise and challenge, a place where cultures met, where wealth and poverty stood side by side, where order and chaos danced in rhythm. Its streets told the story of ambition, of resilience, of daily survival, and of dreams that stretched across oceans and generations. Stepping away from the bustle of towns, one begins to notice how fragile the threads of connection were between settlements in 1700s America. The vastness of the land meant that travel was never simple. Roads, when they existed, were often little more than widened paths cut through forests or worn tracks hardened by wagon wheels. Rain turned them into rivers of mud, snow made them nearly impassable, and in dry summers dust clung to travelers, coating faces, clothes, and horses alike. To move between towns or colonies was less a casual choice and more an undertaking that required preparation, endurance, and patience. Travelers on horseback were the most common sight. Horses provided both speed and reliability, though keeping one fed, shod, and healthy was costly. A rider might cover 30 miles in a day if conditions allowed, yet broken bridges, swollen rivers, or dense forests could cut that distance in half. Wagons offered greater capacity for goods or passengers, but their weight made journeys slower, often 10 to 15 miles a day. Wheels cracked, axles snapped, and without skilled repair, a trip could stall for days on an isolated stretch of road. Coaches appeared in some regions, especially near larger cities, carrying passengers willing to pay for a seat. These rides were anything but comfortable. Passengers bounced over ruts, jostled against one another, and endured long hours in cramped conditions. Yet they offered company, conversation, and at times, safety in numbers. Inns and taverns dotted major routes, providing food, shelter, and stables, though the quality varied greatly. Some offered warm fires, hearty meals, and clean beds, while others barely supplied straw on the floor and ale of questionable taste. For those without horses or money, travel meant walking. Journeys stretched endlessly on foot, carrying belongings in bundles, sleeping outdoors or in barns when kindness allowed. Immigrants, indentured servants, and the poor often took to the road in this way, moving from one opportunity to the next, following rumors of work or land. Their footprints marked the same paths as merchants, soldiers, and ministers, all bound together by the necessity of movement across a rugged land. Rivers provided alternatives to difficult roads. Ferries carried wagons, horses, and people across wide waters, their crossings sometimes smooth, sometimes perilous. Flatboats and canoes floated goods downstream, while sailing vessels traveled coastal routes between colonies. Travel by water offered more speed, but storms, shifting tides, and hidden shoals carried their own dangers. Still, many preferred the certainty of a river current to the unpredictability of mud-choked roads. Travel always brought risk. Robbers, though less common than in old European tales, lurked on remote stretches, waiting for wagons heavy with trade. Wild animals, bears, wolves, or panthers, still roamed in many areas, though more often it was the solitude itself that frightened travelers. To spend a night alone on the road, with only a fire for company and the endless sounds of forest around, stirred unease. Some told stories of spirits haunting crossroads or strange lights leading wanderers astray, tales whispered in taverns that clung to the minds of those who traveled after dark. Letters and news traveled with equal difficulty. A message might take weeks or months to reach its destination, carried by horse or ship, depending on distance. This slow pace of communication meant that by the time news arrived, whether of trade, politics, or family, circumstances had often already changed. Yet the arrival of a letter was a cherished moment, read and reread by candlelight, treasured as a rare connection bridging miles of uncertainty. The postal system in its infancy stitched colonies together. Riders carried sacks of mail between major towns, braving weather and rough roads, guided only by milestones or familiar landmarks. A carved stone by the roadside, a tall tree, a bend in a river, these became markers remembered by generations of travelers. Though primitive, the effort of these routes laid the foundation for greater connection in years to come. The landscape itself shaped travel in profound ways. Dense forests stretched endlessly, their canopy dark even at midday, with paths winding between towering trunks. Rolling hills tested wagons, while marshes slowed every step, sucking at boots and wheels alike. Mountains loomed as obstacles, their rocky passes dangerous but unavoidable for those who sought land or opportunity beyond them. Each region carried its own trials, reminding every traveler that the land was both promise and challenge. Despite hardships, travel also brought discovery. A merchant riding from Boston to New York might carry not only goods but also stories, gossip, and ideas. Travelers shared news of strange inventions, political disputes, or changes in trade. A family moving west found not just land but neighbors who, like them, had endured weeks of difficult roads. These shared experiences forged bonds, giving meaning to the struggle. Travel shaped time itself. Journeys were measured not in hours but in days or weeks. To visit family 100 miles away meant planning, supplies, and endurance. Seasons dictated movement. Winter froze rivers, spring flooded roads, summer brought heat and dust, and autumn offered perhaps the best chance for smoother passage. Each trip carried the weight of decision. Was it worth the risk, the effort, the uncertainty? In many ways, the very act of travel mirrored life in colonial America, unpredictable, demanding, filled with danger, yet always holding the hope of connection and opportunity just beyond the horizon. Every road, no matter how rough, carried not just people and goods but also the silent story of a society slowly binding itself together across vast and untamed lands. Step through the door of a colonial house in the early 1700s, and the world changes. Outside, roads are muddy or bustling. Inside, life has a slower, intimate rhythm. The first thing you notice is the smell, smoke from the hearth mingling with the scent of cooking, wood, and earth brought in on shoes and clothes. The hearth dominates the main room, a constant presence that provides warmth, light, and a place for preparing meals. Iron hooks and cranes hang above, holding kettles and pots, while firewood weights stacked neatly nearby. The flame dances, throwing shadows across walls, bringing both comfort and an unspoken sense of time passing in rhythm with its flicker. Furniture is simple but functional. A rough table sits at the center, serving for eating, sewing, writing, or teaching children. Benches or chairs surround it, though seating is limited, and often families share stools or floor space. Beds are modest, made with wooden frames and stuffed mattresses, frequently shared by multiple siblings to conserve warmth. Blankets and quilts, sometimes homemade, offer protection from drafts, while shelves along walls hold practical items, plates, bowls, jugs, and tools, all within reach for daily life. Lighting is minimal. Candles and lanterns provide faint illumination, creating pools of light where hands work or eyes read. Shadows stretch across the corners, making the room feel larger than it is, filled with both comfort and mystery. During the day, sunlight through small windows warms the floor and illuminates dust particles floating lazily in the air. At night, the home's interior transforms into a quiet sanctuary, with the world outside reduced to sounds carried faintly through walls. A dog barking, the wind rattling shutters, or distant voices from neighbors' homes. Cooking forms the core of household activity. Early mornings might start with boiling water for tea or porridge, baking bread in stone ovens, or preparing salted meat for the day. Cornmeal, beans, and vegetables from the garden appear constantly in meals, while preserved foods, pickled cabbage, dried fruits, and smoked fish supplement what cannot be grown fresh. Every meal requires attention, as spoilage can mean waste, hunger, or illness. Children often help, carrying water, gathering firewood, or stirring pots, learning the rhythm of domestic labor alongside the adults. The home is also a place of craft and skill. Women spin thread, weave cloth, sew garments, and mend torn linens, while men might repair tools, carve wood, or maintain fences. Apprentices within the family or hired help may practice trades, learning skills that will support them in adulthood. Everything is interconnected. The wool spun becomes fabric, fabric becomes clothes, clothes protect against cold, and warmth enables work to continue. Every act has purpose, every object is part of a larger cycle. Small personal touches show character and care. A few pewter plates polished carefully, a basket of herbs hung by the doorway, a sampler stitched with bright thread, all indicate human presence, pride, and imagination. Children's toys, if present, are simple but cherished: a carved wooden horse, a doll made from scraps, or a ball stitched from leather. Even in modest homes, these objects bring joy, proof that creativity and love persist amidst toil. Storage and organization matter deeply. Chests hold clothing, linens, and treasured items. Shelves store cooking implements and containers of grains or beans. Cellars, when present, keep root vegetables, apples, and preserves cool through winter. Barrels stand ready for salted meat or fish, while baskets hold daily provisions. The placement of every object reflects care, experience, and adaptation to the rhythm of daily life. Family interaction dominates. Children cluster near the fire, learning by watching and mimicking, while adults converse, plan, or instruct. Meals bring everyone together briefly, while evenings might include storytelling, singing, or simple games. Religion is present in subtle ways: Bibles on shelves, prayers before meals, or moments of reflection during quiet hours. Even humor finds its place: a story told, a joke shared, laughter soft but constant amidst the routines. Privacy is rare, yet moments exist. A parent may step outside briefly to gather water or herbs, a child may slip into a corner to play quietly, or someone may sit alone by the hearth lost in thought. These small interludes, though fleeting, provide mental space, moments to breathe in a world otherwise dominated by necessity. Windows offer a view to the outside, reminding inhabitants that life stretches beyond the walls. Fields, gardens, paths to the barn, or neighboring houses provide a constant connection to the broader world. Birds might alight on windowsills, the wind rustle leaves, and the sky shift color, all observed from the comfort and safety of the home. Sleep ends the day in quiet routine. The hearth dies down, candles gutter, and the house becomes still. Children huddle under blankets. Adults rest with eyes heavy from labor. Outside, night sounds continue: the soft rustle of trees, the occasional call of an owl, or distant footsteps along a path. Inside, warmth, shelter, and family presence combine to create a fragile but enduring sanctuary the domestic heart of colonial life. Even in the most modest homes, life is rich with texture, labor and leisure, warmth and cold, work and creativity, routine and imagination. These walls contain the unspoken rhythm of generations, the quiet heartbeat of people shaping both their homes and the world beyond. In colonial America, childhood was brief, framed by necessity and survival. From the earliest years, children were expected to contribute, learning through observation, imitation, and hands-on labor. The concept of carefree play existed only in fleeting moments, squeezed between chores and lessons. Boys and girls assumed tasks appropriate to their age and gender, preparing themselves for the adult world that awaited them, often sooner than we might imagine today. From dawn, children helped with domestic labor. Girls carried water from wells, stirred porridge, milked goats or cows, and tended younger siblings. They learned sewing, spinning, and cooking, gradually mastering skills that would one day define their own households. Boys assisted in fields or barns, carrying bundles of firewood, herding chickens or pigs, or helping with planting and harvesting crops. Even seemingly small tasks, the mending of fences, the sharpening of tools, or the cleaning of floors, taught patience, precision, and responsibility. Education was uneven but present. In towns and villages, small schoolhouses offered lessons in reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious instruction. Latin and classical subjects appeared for those whose families could afford extended learning. Many children studied the Bible intensely, learning verses by heart, absorbing both spiritual lessons and literacy at the same time. School days could be long and strict, with punishments for misbehavior or laziness. Slates might be struck, hands held under cold water, or names recorded for public correction. Yet knowledge offered promise. The ability to read letters, keep accounts, or participate in trade was essential to survival and social mobility. Outside formal schooling, apprenticeships provided practical education. Boys in towns might apprentice with blacksmiths, carpenters, coopers, or shoemakers, spending years learning a trade, while girls might train in weaving, sewing, or domestic management under mothers or neighboring women. These apprenticeships were intense, with long hours, limited freedom, and constant oversight, yet they formed the foundation for skill, independence, and future livelihood. Play persisted, but always intertwined with learning. Children made toys from available materials, dolls from scraps of cloth, wooden tops carved from branches, balls stitched from leather, or simple figures shaped from clay. Games such as tag, hide and seek, or marbles allowed brief respite, while teaching coordination, strategy, and social skills. Stories shared by parents, elders, or traveling neighbors entertained and instructed, mixing cautionary tales, moral lessons, and humor. Even chores contained elements of discovery, as a child might notice a new plant in the garden, a bird's nest in a tree, or the changing pattern of clouds above fields. Adolescence accelerated responsibility. By early teens, boys were expected to manage larger tasks in the fields or workshops, sometimes taking over work previously done by adults. Girls, similarly, were trained to manage a household, care for younger siblings, and master cooking, weaving, and sewing. This early immersion in adult life shaped character, instilling resilience, discipline, and ingenuity. Mistakes carried consequences. A failed harvest, a broken tool, or a spoiled meal impacted the family, reinforcing awareness that each action mattered. Health and safety were constant concerns. Children faced illness, injury, and harsh weather daily. Smallpox, measles, and other diseases threatened, and medical knowledge was limited. Parents relied on herbal remedies, rudimentary care, and observation. Yet even with risk, children explored the world with curiosity. They climbed trees, helped herd animals, and wandered along streams, learning the land intimately. Knowledge of rivers, forests, and animal behavior was practical as well as instinctive, critical for later independence. Food played a central role in childhood experience. Cornmeal porridge, bread, cheese, and vegetables formed the daily diet, supplemented by fruits, milk, and occasional meat. Children learned to cook early, practicing simple recipes alongside their mothers or older siblings. They carried water from wells, gathered herbs, and learned the patience required to preserve food for winter. Meals were more than nourishment. They were lessons in responsibility, care, and timing, and they carried social lessons as well, teaching children about cooperation, sharing, and order. Social life among peers was informal yet meaningful. Children formed alliances, competed in games, learned to negotiate disputes, and practiced cooperation. Siblings taught one another skills, shared knowledge, and sometimes quarreled intensely only to reconcile through the routines of daily life. Stories, songs, and secret adventures created a private world layered atop the duties imposed by families, blending imagination with practicality. Religion shaped youth experiences as well. Attendance at church services was expected, and lessons from scripture influenced behavior, ethics, and relationships. Moral instruction interwove with education, reinforcing obedience, diligence, and piety. Religious festivals offered both ritual and joy, providing structured moments of celebration, reflection, and connection to community. By late adolescence, the line between child and adult blurred. Responsibilities, knowledge, and social awareness had grown considerably. Work, learning, social interaction, and spiritual development intertwined, forming a life where survival, skill, and morality were inseparable. Childhood, brief as it was, became a period of preparation, shaping minds and bodies for the demanding realities of colonial life. In this way, life in colonial America, even for children, was both structured and immersive. Every day taught lessons, built habits, and fostered connections to family, to land, and to a wider community stretching across settlements, towns, and colonies. Childhood was not a time of idle play, but a time of apprenticeship in life itself, where every action contributed to the enduring rhythm of survival, learning, and the shaping of character. In 1700s America, the heartbeat of life was work. From dawn to dusk, adults labored not only for survival but also to sustain the fragile threads of communities, families, and commerce. Every colony, town, and village had its own rhythm, yet a common thread connected them all. Labor was central, and the value of skill and effort was immediate and tangible. Farmers tilled the earth, a practice both art and endurance. Fields were cleared by hand, plows drawn by oxen or horses carving furrows into the soil. Crops rotated seasonally, responding to climate and necessity, while families collaborated tirelessly. Planting, weeding, and harvesting were not solo activities. They demanded coordination, timing, and vigilance. Failure had immediate consequences. A missed planting, a drought, or an unexpected frost could mean weeks of hunger, lost trade, or financial strain. Farmers were part cultivators, part meteorologists, part strategists, always interpreting the land to maximize its yield. Beyond the farm, trades flourished in towns and cities. Blacksmiths shaped iron into tools, horseshoes, hinges, and nails, their forges radiating both heat and rhythm. The steady ringing of hammer against anvil became part of the soundtrack of life, signaling industry and reliability. Carpenters worked wood into furniture, boats, houses, and barrels, measuring, cutting, joining, and planing with a precision born of necessity. Each creation carried both utility and pride, demonstrating skill to clients and neighbors alike. Cobblers repaired shoes, often wearing thick leather aprons while wielding knives and awls, ensuring that every family member could walk safely through mud, snow, or dust. Tailors and seamstresses cut, stitched, and mended garments, balancing practicality with occasional touches of style for those who could afford it. Bakers baked daily, filling the air with the smell of bread and pies, while coopers made barrels for food, drink, and trade. Every trade relied on labor, attention to detail, and an intimate understanding of materials, tools, and human need. Commerce connected these trades across distances. Markets in towns bustled with exchange, not only of goods but also of news and ideas. Merchants imported sugar, tea, and spices from Europe, while local farmers and artisans sold wheat, butter, cloth, and tools. Bartering remained common, each transaction a negotiation that reflected both scarcity and skill. Coins were treasured, yet reputation and reliability often mattered as much as cash, binding communities through trust as much as commerce. Some adults pursued specialized work. Shipbuilders and sailors carried the lifeblood of trade along rivers and coasts, constructing vessels that could carry goods, people, and letters between colonies and across the Atlantic. Their days involved heavy labor, precise measurements, and endless attention to the elements. Fishermen and whalers braved uncertain waters, hauling nets or harpoons to feed families, merchants, and cities far inland. Their work demanded endurance, courage, and adaptability, with each tide and current shaping both opportunity and danger. Labor also defined social structure. Wealthier households employed servants or indentured workers, while poorer families depended solely on their own effort. Enslaved people, particularly in southern colonies, performed forced labor on plantations, cultivating rice, indigo, tobacco, and other cash crops. Their toil created wealth that others benefited from, yet it came at immense human cost, shaping the economy while leaving deep scars on every community. Observing the rhythms of work reveals how both privilege and oppression were intertwined with daily survival. Even within domestic life, labor was ceaseless. Women managed cooking, cleaning, childcare, preservation of food, and sometimes production of goods for sale. They spun thread, wove cloth, and stitched garments, contributing both to household survival and to economic exchange. Men oversaw fields, workshops, transportation, and trade negotiations, their skills ranging from carpentry to bookkeeping. In both roles, work demanded knowledge, strength, patience, and resilience, every day a test of endurance and ingenuity. Trade brought interaction beyond immediate neighbors. Ships arriving from Europe carried not only goods but also ideas, pamphlets, and news of politics, war, or social change. Local merchants relayed this information, creating networks of knowledge and rumor that shaped perceptions, decisions, and aspirations. News traveled slowly yet persistently, carried on horseback, boat, or foot, tying colonies together in a web of economic and social connections. Labor shaped time itself. Seasons dictated activities: spring planting, summer maintenance, autumn harvest, and winter preparation. Daily life adhered to this cycle, yet each day demanded attention to the unexpected: broken tools, sick animals, inclement weather, or changing markets. Success meant both foresight and flexibility, while failure could ripple across families and communities. Evenings, though brief moments of respite, offered small rewards for work completed. Families gathered to eat, share stories, and rest, yet the mind often lingered on the tasks awaiting sunrise. Sleep was necessary, but it was measured against the ongoing demand for productivity. Every individual's labor contributed to the functioning of society, binding them together in a web of mutual dependence. Work in colonial America was not just survival, it was identity. The crafts, skills, and effort defined who people were, their place in the community, and their connection to the land and to one another. Each hammer strike, stitch, or harvest contributed to a larger story of life unfolding across fields, streets, and harbors, linking generations through rhythm, labor, and aspiration. Life in 1700s America was defined not only by work but also by the spaces between labor, the moments when people gathered, laughed, shared news, and celebrated the small triumphs and seasonal rhythms that structured existence. Social life in colonial times was deeply intertwined with survival, community, and tradition, yet it also carried a richness of culture, creativity, and human connection that gave the harsh world of labor its texture and warmth. Churches often formed the center of social life, with their influence extending beyond worship. Congregations gathered not only to hear sermons but also to meet neighbors, discuss events, and exchange practical advice. Sunday services punctuated the week, offering both spiritual guidance and social interaction. After prayers and hymns, families often lingered in churchyards or nearby open spaces, sharing news, greetings, and stories. Festivals and religious holidays brought larger gatherings, where music, dance, and feasting blended devotion with celebration. Community festivals celebrated both natural cycles and shared accomplishments. Harvest gatherings were particularly vibrant, marking the culmination of months of work and the promise of sustenance for winter. Tables were laden with roasted meats, pies, bread, and cider. People sang, danced, and exchanged tales. Even simple acts, like carrying a basket of apples to neighbors, became a form of participation, reinforcing social bonds and mutual support. Seasonal celebrations offered relief from toil, brief moments where stories, games, and laughter flowed freely across age groups. Taverns and inns served as informal social hubs, especially for adults. These spaces hosted travelers, merchants, sailors, and locals, their rooms filled with conversation, debate, and music. Ale flowed alongside gossip, news, and discussion of politics or trade. These gatherings strengthened networks, allowed the exchange of ideas, and created spaces where reputation, trust, and influence grew. While work connected people to their labor, taverns connected them to the wider community and to ideas traveling across the Atlantic. Games and entertainment were woven into social gatherings. Adults played cards, dice, or checkers, while children participated in simple races, tag, or marbles. Music provided a constant backdrop: fiddles, flutes, drums, or voices raised in song. Dancing brought families and neighbors together, steps and claps synchronized across barns, town halls, or open fields. The energy of movement, the warmth of firelight, and the laughter of friends and kin transformed ordinary evenings into memorable experiences. Education also featured a social dimension. Schoolhouses in towns became places where children not only learned reading, writing, and arithmetic but also exchanged news, practiced collaboration, and forged early friendships. Apprenticeship bonds reinforced social ties among young people as shared labor, learning, and mentorship shaped both skill and character. Even in rural areas, informal gatherings for storytelling or skill-sharing strengthened connections across families and neighbors. Marriage and family milestones formed major social events. Weddings, baptisms, and naming ceremonies were occasions for extended celebrations. Families and communities participated in preparing feasts, decorating homes, and providing entertainment. Music, dancing, and storytelling accompanied meals, while small games, jokes, and communal rituals kept spirits high. These events demonstrated the interdependence of families, the importance of tradition, and the continuity of social structure. News, rumor, and gossip were vital to social life. Without rapid communication, word of mouth carried information, warnings, and stories, sometimes mixing fact with embellishment. Markets, taverns, and churchyards became the stages where these exchanges occurred, shaping perceptions, expectations, and social behavior. A story told of a ship arriving from Europe, a wealthy merchant's fortunes, or a neighboring family's illness could travel across villages faster than any letter, weaving the social fabric tightly together. Even solitude was often shared in subtle ways. People noticed neighbors' smoke from chimneys, footsteps on paths, or the sound of work being done nearby. Observation and awareness formed part of social life, as individuals measured their actions against those around them, learned patterns, and adapted. Community did not require constant conversation. Sometimes it existed in the rhythm of presence, the assurance of shared routines, or the simple sight of distant figures tending fields or walking to town. Entertainment adapted to environment and resources. Storytelling persisted as a favorite pastime, mixing legend, morality, and humor. Tales of local heroes, escaped convicts, or mysterious events entertained both young and old. Improvisation played a role. A broken wheel might become the centerpiece of a game, a candle stub a prop for shadow puppets, and a patch of snow a track for racing or sledding. Resourcefulness defined amusement, demonstrating creativity born of necessity. Food always accompanied social life. Feasts or casual gatherings relied on shared labor and seasonal abundance. Bread, cheese, pies, cider, and roasted meats reflected the local environment and the skill of cooks. Preparing, serving, and consuming these meals became communal acts, reinforcing relationships, teaching etiquette, and offering comfort. Even modest households participated, using available resources to mark moments of togetherness and celebration. Through all this, social life shaped identity, teaching lessons about cooperation, reputation, morality, and joy. It reminded individuals that survival was not only about labor or resources but also about connection, memory, and culture. Music, stories, games, dances, festivals, and conversations intertwined with work and home life, creating a rhythm that sustained both body and spirit. In 1700s America, these human connections were as vital as food, water, or shelter, threads that held communities together, making the hardships of colonial life not only bearable but meaningful. Colonial America's calendar was punctuated with rituals, celebrations, and the rhythm of recurring festivals, each carrying its own combination of work, joy, and community. These occasions offered brief respites from the relentless demands of daily labor, giving families and neighbors opportunities to gather, share, and create memories that would linger long after the event ended. Religious holidays shaped much of the social landscape. Christmas, though observed differently across regions, brought warmth in the depth of winter. Evergreens adorned doorways, and families shared modest gifts or baked treats, creating a sense of continuity with distant homelands. New Year's celebrations were smaller but marked with reflection and hope, often observed with special meals, small gatherings, and songs. Easter, with its focus on renewal and faith, inspired feasts and family gatherings, as well as outdoor walks when weather permitted. Secular and seasonal celebrations were equally meaningful. Harvest festivals, perhaps the most important communal events, celebrated abundance and survival. Fields heavy with grain, orchards ripe with fruit, and barns bursting with hay became stages for music, storytelling, and dance. People traveled from nearby farms to join, bringing food, instruments, and goodwill. Even children, usually immersed in chores, participated in races, simple games, and singing, learning the rhythms of community celebration as part of their upbringing. Music formed the heartbeat of these gatherings. Fiddles, flutes, drums, and even homemade instruments filled air with melody, while voices sang tunes passed down through generations. Some songs carried European origins, others arose spontaneously from local experiences, blending into a distinctly colonial soundscape. Singing occurred at tables, around hearths, and in barn dances, uniting participants through rhythm and harmony. Children learned quickly, joining in rounds or echoing refrains, their voices a joyful complement to the adult chorus. Dance followed naturally from music, offering both entertainment and social instruction. Barns, open fields, and occasionally taverns hosted reels, jigs, and quadrilles, sometimes stretching late into the night. Participants learned steps, timing, and coordination, practicing patience and cooperation while celebrating togetherness. Men and women moved with an eye toward etiquette, while young people observed and imitated, absorbing social norms alongside physical skill. The energy of movement, coupled with music and laughter, created a palpable sense of joy that transcended the hard labor of daily life. Storytelling intertwined with music and dance. Tales of distant lands, local heroes, and supernatural events were shared beside fires, while narrators added dramatic gestures, tones, or humor to capture attention. Legends of shipwrecks, lost treasure, or mysterious travelers fascinated audiences, mixing caution with entertainment. Children clung to words, repeating lines for amusement, while adults reflected on moral lessons or practical warnings embedded in the narratives. Food was central to celebration, binding social gatherings with flavor, effort, and generosity. Pies, roasted meats, bread, cheese, preserves, and seasonal fruits reflected the bounty of land and skill. Cooking for communal events demanded planning, teamwork, and careful allocation of ingredients. In wealthier households, imported items, sugar, spices, or dried fruits appeared sparingly, enhancing the sense of festivity. In smaller homes, ingenuity ensured that even limited resources became memorable feasts. Meals were more than nourishment. They were performances of hospitality, care, and shared identity. Some traditions reflected European origins, adapted to the new land. Maypole dances, harvest rituals, and seasonal fairs appeared sporadically, often influenced by immigrant communities. Quaker, Puritan, and Anglican observances shaped the tone of celebrations, emphasizing morality, order, and reverence. Yet even within strict frameworks, moments of mirth, play, and music persisted. Cultural fusion emerged naturally, blending indigenous practices, European customs, and local innovation. Games accompanied festivities, particularly for the young. Races, climbing challenges, simple tossing games, or pretend battles provided both amusement and instruction. Children learned coordination, strategy, and social interaction while enjoying moments unburdened by chores. For adults, card games, dice, or informal contests offered mental stimulation, opportunities for small wagers, or simply shared enjoyment. Play, whether structured or spontaneous, was an essential counterbalance to labor, reinforcing bonds across age groups. These celebrations, while ephemeral, left lasting impressions. They strengthened community identity, transmitted knowledge across generations, and preserved memory. Music, dance, storytelling, and ritual all acted as vessels for cultural continuity, connecting past with present while offering respite from toil. Even minor events, an impromptu gathering after harvest, a neighbor's wedding, or a church picnic added texture to everyday life, forming a subtle network of experience and expectation that bound people together. Through festivals, music, dance, and shared meals, the colonies cultivated not just survival but joy, creativity, and belonging. These cultural moments, fleeting though they were, reminded people that even in the harsh realities of 1700s America, laughter, rhythm, and human connection endured, shaping the daily story of life across settlements, towns, and villages. Life in colonial America was inseparable from the land, from the forests stretching endlessly to the rivers winding through settlements, and above all, from the changing seasons that dictated the rhythm of existence. Weather shaped work, travel, celebration, and survival, leaving an imprint on every day of the year. People learned to read the sky, sense shifts in wind, and anticipate changes that could affect crops, animals, and family life. Spring was a season of preparation and cautious optimism. As the snow melted and the soil softened, farmers and laborers emerged to inspect fields, repair tools, and plan planting. Muddy paths slowed travel, yet the sight of buds on trees, birds returning from migration, and streams swelling with snowmelt brought hope. Gardens were tilled, seeds scattered, and livestock tended with renewed attention. Children helped carry water, collect manure for fertilization, and learned the delicate timing required to ensure the year's crops would grow. Every action, from planting a row of beans to tending a sapling, carried immediate consequences for survival and sustenance. Summer intensified both labor and opportunity. Days lengthened, providing hours for fieldwork, crafts, and trade. Sunlight baked roads, dried clay, and ripened fruits and vegetables. Harvesting early crops, such as peas, radishes, or berries, demanded careful timing to prevent spoilage. Livestock required constant attention. Cows and goats needed grazing, chickens collected from varied pastures, and horses trained or prepared for work. Even in towns, summer brought a pulse of activity. Market stalls filled with fresh produce, rivers and harbors teemed with boats, and craftspeople worked with increased urgency to supply goods for both local and distant demand. Heat and insects tested patience and endurance. Flies buzzed relentlessly around kitchens and stables, mosquitoes swarmed near rivers, and the sun's intensity required hats, water, and shade. Yet the season also allowed moments of respite. Families rested in shaded gardens, children played along streams, and neighbors gathered for shared work or impromptu celebration. The abundance of summer provided both nourishment and distraction, a brief window where effort and reward were balanced. Autumn shifted the landscape to preparation and reflection. Leaves turned gold, orange, and crimson, marking the approach of shorter days and colder nights. Harvest intensified, with corn, squash, pumpkins, and apples collected, dried, or stored for winter. Families and communities worked together to thresh grain, press cider, smoke meat, and preserve vegetables. Festivals celebrated abundance, blending work with music, storytelling, and shared meals. Every harvested bushel, barrel, and basket reflected weeks of labor, patience, and knowledge, a tangible reward for effort and a shield against scarcity. Winter imposed stillness, yet it demanded constant vigilance. Snow and ice slowed movement, making roads nearly impassable and rivers treacherous. Fires burned continuously in hearths, providing warmth for cooking, comfort, and survival. Families gathered indoors, tending candles, repairing tools, sewing garments, and spinning thread. Livestock needed shelter and care, and water often had to be carried from wells or melted from snow. Daily life became more introspective, with time spent storytelling, reading, and planning for the months ahead. Silence and darkness framed the season, yet it was also a period of reflection, teaching patience, resourcefulness, and endurance. Weather events could reshape lives instantly. Thunderstorms, hurricanes along the coast, sudden frosts, or floods carried both danger and disruption. Farmers observed the sky closely, noting wind direction, cloud formation, and animal behavior. Knowledge passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor, informed decisions. When to sow, when to harvest, when to travel. A single storm could ruin a field, a bridge could wash away, or a river overflow could threaten homes, making vigilance and adaptability essential traits. Animals and plants dictated human activity. Deer and rabbits provided meat for families, while birds indicated seasonal shifts. Beekeeping and fishing offered sustenance and trade goods, requiring skill and constant attention. Forests yielded timber, firewood, berries, and medicinal herbs, but navigating them demanded awareness of terrain, predators, and seasonal hazards. Even the smallest details, the angle of sunlight, the color of leaves, the migration of swallows, shaped planning, labor, and survival. Colonial Americans existed in a constant dialogue with nature. Their lives were marked by observation, adaptation, and a delicate balance between exertion and respect for the environment. Seasons were not merely markers of time, they were active forces that dictated almost every decision, from what to plant to when to travel, from the timing of festivals to the intensity of work. Through this intimate connection with nature, people developed a rhythm of life that intertwined survival, skill, and the subtle pleasures of observing the world around them. Even as storms roared and winter winds howled, there was beauty in the cycle, buds unfolding in spring, the hum of summer activity, the golden glow of autumn fields, and the quiet, introspective stillness of winter. Life in colonial America was not merely a matter of labor or endurance. It was an ongoing dance with nature, where knowledge, skill, and attentiveness transformed challenge into routine and survival into living. The heart of every colonial home was the kitchen, where warmth, sustenance, and the rhythm of daily life converged in smoke, fire, and aroma. Kitchens were often the busiest spaces in the house, where chores, learning, and family interactions blended seamlessly. The hearth dominated the room, both literally and figuratively, providing heat for cooking, warmth for family gatherings, and a steady presence around which life unfolded. Meals were structured around available ingredients and the seasons. Cornmeal, wheat, and rye formed the basis of bread, porridge, and pancakes. Vegetables such as beans, peas, onions, and cabbage appeared in stews or side dishes, while root vegetables like carrots, turnips, and parsnips sustained families through winter. Meat, usually pork, beef, or chicken, was reserved for special occasions or supplemented from hunting. Salted and smoked meats extended supplies beyond the fresh harvest, while dried beans, grains, and preserved fruits allowed households to weather lean months. Breakfast often began before sunrise. Families stirred porridge or oatmeal over a simmering fire, baked bread in stone ovens, and brewed weak tea or small beer for warmth and refreshment. Children helped stir pots, fetch water, or grind grain, learning both skill and patience. Men heading to fields or workshops might carry a small loaf, cheese, or salted meat to sustain them through the morning. Even these modest meals were prepared with care, as efficiency and survival were inseparable from taste and nutrition. Lunch and supper varied by season and availability. Stews simmered for hours, combining whatever vegetables, meats, or herbs were on hand. Pies, often made from fruit, meat, or a mixture, appeared regularly, both as sustenance and as a demonstration of skill. Eggs, milk, and butter enriched meals when available, while herbs like parsley, sage, and thyme added flavor. Meals were communal affairs, with families gathering around a rough-hewn table, sharing food, conversation, and occasionally gossip or news. Eating was not merely sustenance. It was instruction, observation, and a ritual of connection. Preservation was crucial. Summer brought abundance, yet planning for winter required drying, salting, smoking, or pickling. Fruits became jams or preserves, vegetables pickled in barrels, and meat salted or smoked over long fires. Honey and maple syrup sweetened dishes, while grains and legumes were stored in barrels or sacks for months. Every act of preparation reflected knowledge, care, and foresight, ensuring survival through periods when fresh food was scarce. Drinks were simple but essential. Water, often drawn from wells or streams, was supplemented by weak beer or cider, both safer to drink than untreated water. Tea appeared among wealthier households, while coffee was a rare luxury. Milk, when available, was consumed fresh or turned into butter and cheese. Consumption was functional, yet even beverages carried subtle rituals, whether brewing tea carefully or passing a mug of cider during communal work. Cooking required both skill and improvisation. Hearth fires demanded constant attention, as flames fluctuated and smoke could fill a room. Pots, kettles, and pans were adjusted above the heat, stews stirred, bread rotated in ovens, and pies monitored carefully. Fuel was always a concern, wood had to be chopped, dried, and stored, and water needed hauling, often over long distances. Meals were the product of labor, observation, and timing, transforming basic ingredients into nourishment and occasionally delight. Special occasions introduced richer fare. Holidays, weddings, or festivals brought more elaborate dishes: roasted meats, pies filled with seasonal fruits, bread sweetened with honey, and preserved delicacies. Families spared ingredients for guests or celebration, creating moments where labor yielded not just sustenance but pleasure. These meals reinforced community bonds, teaching children the significance of sharing, preparation, and ceremony. Even simple foods reflected identity and adaptation. Corn, originally cultivated by Native Americans, became a staple in breads, porridge, and puddings. Potatoes, introduced from Europe, complemented vegetables and grains. Beans, squash, and herbs provided nutrition and variety. Through these ingredients, families connected with both the land and the broader web of trade, using what was available locally while incorporating items that arrived from distant colonies or continents. Kitchens were also classrooms. Children learned chopping, stirring, baking, and seasoning under the watchful eyes of parents or older siblings. Mistakes were corrected gently or firmly, as precision and attention were critical to both taste and safety. The rhythms of cooking, stoking fires, kneading dough, checking stews, taught timing, observation, and patience, blending labor with learning in a seamless cycle. Through hearth and table, colonial families experienced daily life in tangible ways. Food nourished the body, but preparation, sharing, and ritual nourished the mind, relationships, and cultural continuity. Every meal, from porridge at dawn to a holiday feast by candlelight, reflected adaptation, skill, and the ever-present interplay between survival and comfort, duty and pleasure, labor and celebration. In colonial America, what people drank was as important as what they ate, shaping daily life, social gatherings, and commerce. Water, though essential, was often unsafe from wells, streams, or rain-fed sources, so colonists developed alternatives, balancing safety, taste, and availability. Simple solutions became routine. Small beer, cider, milk, and herbal infusions dominated households, while rarer imported beverages reflected status, trade, and cultural connection. Small beer, a weekly fermented brew, was consumed throughout the day, especially by children and adults performing laborious tasks. Its low alcohol content made it a practical alternative to untreated water, while the fermentation process provided safety and nutrition. Cider, pressed from apples and sometimes fermented more strongly, appeared in both rural and urban homes, offering refreshment, warmth, and a mild intoxicating effect for those able to partake responsibly. These drinks accompanied meals, sustained workers, and occasionally formed the basis of celebration. Milk, fresh when available, served multiple purposes. Consumed directly or churned into butter, turned into cheese, or added to porridge, Milk reflected both abundance and practicality. Seasonal fluctuations determined availability, with spring and summer providing richness while winter demanded careful preservation. Milk's role extended beyond nutrition. It symbolized domestic management, family skill, and foresight in the use of limited resources. Tea, coffee, and chocolate were rarer, imported luxuries from Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, accessible mainly to wealthier households or merchants. Tea carried both ritual and status, steeped carefully in teapots, poured into small cups, and served with minimal ceremony that communicated refinement and knowledge of global trade networks. Coffee, newly arriving from European colonies, began appearing in urban homes and taverns, stimulating conversation and social gatherings, while chocolate, often sweetened with sugar, represented indulgence and curiosity for flavors beyond the local diet. Even in these rarities, preparation and consumption followed strict rules, demonstrating awareness of etiquette and connection to the wider world. Alcohol extended beyond small beer and cider. Rum, often imported from Caribbean plantations, became a commodity in both trade and local consumption. Families might keep small barrels, using rum for medicinal purposes, preservation, or occasional conviviality. Taverns in towns served these beverages alongside communal meals, card games, and discussion, creating spaces where local and global economies intersected. Trade in spirits reflected the intertwined worlds of labor, leisure, and commerce, binding the colonies to the broader Atlantic network. Food trade complemented beverage consumption. Salted fish, sugar, spices, dried fruits, and grains traveled long distances, linking rural farms with port cities and distant markets. Merchants facilitated both survival and experimentation, providing ingredients that colonists could adapt into local recipes. Sugar, a rare luxury, sweetened teas, pies, and cakes. Spices such as nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves enhanced flavor. Dried fruits extended the calendar of freshness for celebrations. Even a modest household might access these items sparingly, transforming everyday meals into opportunities for creativity and enjoyment. Preservation techniques were essential. Herbs, spices, alcohol, and salt acted as both flavoring and storage aids. Jars, barrels, and cellars kept produce, preserves, and beverages viable across seasons. Family knowledge dictated timing and method. A poorly salted herring could spoil a meal, while a well-fermented cider barrel might provide refreshment for months. These practices combined practical skill with subtle artistry, showing that survival and culture were never entirely separate. Rare delicacies, whether imported or local, carried social meaning. Hosting a small tea gathering or sharing a pie with unusual spices demonstrated hospitality, status, and knowledge of global commerce. Children observed and learned, imitating rituals, tasting sparingly, and understanding that food and drink were intertwined with culture, economy, and identity. Even for modest households, the occasional inclusion of sugar, nuts, or imported spice elevated a meal, reinforcing bonds with neighbors and family. Markets, taverns, and ports acted as hubs for beverage and food exchange. Goods arrived from Europe, the Caribbean, and other colonies, moving slowly yet purposefully through warehouses, carts, and riverboats. News traveled alongside these goods, connecting local populations to global events, trade shifts, and cultural trends. The presence of foreign ingredients or beverages was more than novelty. It represented the pulse of commerce, curiosity, and the expansive reach of colonial life. Through beverages, trade, and rare delicacies, life in colonial America gained depth, variety, and connection. Every cup of cider, every sip of tea, and every slice of spiced pie told a story of adaptation, skill, and engagement with a world far beyond the immediate household. Drinks and rare foods became markers of time, season, and social exchange, shaping daily life, celebration, and community memory across towns, farms, and ports. Colonial life was shaped not only by farms and kitchens but also by workshops and craft centers, where skill, trade, and ingenuity transformed raw materials into essential goods. Every town, village, and settlement contained spaces where the rhythm of labor and commerce intertwined, forming both livelihoods and community identity. These workshops were alive with sound, movement, and purpose, reflecting the diverse needs and aspirations of colonial society. Blacksmiths dominated streets and alleys with the sharp ringing of hammer against iron. Sparks leapt from anvils, illuminating tools, horseshoes, nails, and utensils as they took shape. The blacksmith's forge was more than a workplace. It was a center of local interaction. Travelers, farmers, and neighbors paused to discuss repairs, request custom items, or exchange news. Every iron object, from a plow blade to a cooking trivet, represented not only labor but also a connection between producer and consumer, skill and necessity. Carpenters transformed raw timber into furniture, barrels, homes, and boats, their work both practical and expressive. Sawdust filled the air, planes smoothed rough surfaces, and chisels carved intricate details into essential objects. Apprentices observed, learning the precise angles, measurement, and patience required. In town or rural homestead, a carpenter's skill determined the durability and comfort of homes, the functionality of barns, and even the status of a household, as furniture quality reflected wealth, taste, and local resources. Coopers created barrels, casks, and containers essential for storage and transport. Every plank, joint, and hoop demanded precision, as misalignment could ruin a shipment or spoil a harvest. These barrels held salted meat, grains, cider, and imported goods, forming an invisible yet vital network sustaining households and trade. In port towns, coopers were indispensable, their craft linking local life with distant colonies through the secure transport of commodities. Shoemakers, tailors, and weavers attended to personal needs and commerce. Shoes were repaired and crafted for protection against mud, snow, and dust. Tailors transformed cloth into garments appropriate for both labor and occasional social display. Weavers spun thread and wove fabric, producing both practical and decorative materials. Each artisan contributed to daily life, shaping what people wore, used, and relied upon, their expertise a constant, silent presence in households across the colonies. Workshops were also centers of learning and mentorship. Apprenticeships lasted years, during which young people observed, practiced, and gradually assumed responsibility. Mistakes were corrected, techniques refined, and knowledge of materials deepened. Boys and sometimes girls learned the rhythm of work, the patience of skill, and the importance of precision. The relationship between master and apprentice created continuity, passing craft knowledge from one generation to the next, embedding culture and economy in hands, eyes, and minds. Markets brought these goods to public attention. Town squares filled with stalls, carts, and booths where artisans displayed their wares alongside farmers selling produce. The air buzzed with conversation, negotiation, and laughter. Merchants arranged items carefully. Pottery glinted in sunlight, textiles draped to show quality, and tools displayed their utility. Market days were social events, attracting neighbors, travelers, and those seeking news as much as goods. The market formed a bridge between labor and consumption, producing a living economy grounded in trust, reputation, and skill. Trade extended beyond immediate surroundings. Wagons transported goods between towns, rivers carried cargo to distant ports, and merchants coordinated exchanges that connected colonies to Europe, the Caribbean, and beyond. Imported items, sugar, spices, wine, fabric, entered alongside local products, creating a blend of necessity and luxury. Craftspeople adjusted, adapted, and sometimes innovated, producing items tailored to local demand or to imitate distant fashions, demonstrating adaptability and ingenuity. Workshops also hosted social interaction. Artisans shared techniques, swapped news, and advised each other on materials or repairs. Apprentices learned not only skill but also etiquette, negotiation, and community norms. Even mundane labor, repeated daily, became an avenue for observation, conversation, and the subtle reinforcement of social bonds. In this way, craft work was both economic and cultural, connecting individual effort with broader communal life. Through workshops and markets, colonial America wove a complex tapestry of labor, commerce, and social interaction. Every hammer strike, stitch, and weave contributed to survival, comfort, and identity. Trade connected homes, towns, and distant regions, while apprenticeships ensured that skill and knowledge endured across generations. In these spaces, the ordinary rhythms of work became the pulse of colonial society, shaping daily life, relationships, and the very texture of existence.